Hey pen people, welcome back to Down the Breather Hole. My name's Brian. I hope you've had a nice holiday season. It's been good for my family. Hope it's been good for yours. And I hope you're ready to kick off 2022. Today, what I want to do is compare these two pens. I've got a Lamy Safari here and a Diplomat Magnum. And these pens actually have quite a bit in common. They're both entry-level plastic pens, both German made. They both have ink windows. They both have triangular grip sections, and the list goes on. So that's the kind of thing I want to look at. I want to compare these pens, talk about the pros and cons of each of them, and see if we can determine which one is better. So let's flip the camera around and we'll get started. Okay, here we go. So let's talk about we'll talk about the similarities, then we'll talk about the differences. But first, I just want to point out, this is my king size pen bed. They're available on Etsy. No pressure, but if you'd like to go check that out, you can. There's a link in the description. Okay, so like I said, these are both German-made pens. They're both plastic, and they're both entry level. So the Lamy Safari right now is $29 and some change, and the Diplomat Magnum is $23 and some change. So they're both fairly inexpensive pens, though in the entry level world, $29 and $23, there is kind of a gap there. There are whole pens that you could buy with the difference between those two prices. So it's a little bit of a jump in price, nothing crazy, but they're both under $30 at the moment. They both have ink windows on both sides of the pen. So you got one here on top and another on the bottom. And that kind of allows, you can look through one side and then light can come through the other side and give you a good idea of how much ink you have. It's the same thing with this one. It's a little bit harder to see because this is a demonstrator, but it's the same concept with the opaque models that they also have. So this one is more of a wedge shape rather than an oval. It's kind of an interesting shape there. And both of these pens come in a variety of colors. Diplomat just came out with these demo colors not too long ago. There's orange, blue, and I think purple. And they're all pretty fun looking. And then they also have more of their standard opaque colors as well. And then Lamy Safari has a ton of colors, and they're always coming out with special editions. I think yearly they come out with at least one, but sometimes two or three. And this is the special edition from a few years back. This is the petrol edition. It's a really, really pretty dark teal with black trim and a black nib, which is really cool. As far as I know, Diplomat doesn't do special editions with their Magnums the same way, but they do come out with new colors from time to time, and there's a good selection. Another thing that these pens have in common is that they both have really kind of different clips. They're kind of unique as far as what I've seen in the pen world. The Lamy Safari is the most obvious, definitely. It's got this almost paper clip looking clip. It's very large. It's also very functional. It feels really nice, and it works well with pants pockets, shirt pockets, backpack pockets. It's just very versatile. It's also kind of a love it or hate it thing. I kind of love it. A lot of people don't. The Magnum has a little bit more of an understated clip, but it's definitely a different approach to a clip than most pens have, especially entry-level pens. So most entry-level pens have something a little bit more like this platinum pre-fount here, where it's like they took a sheet of metal and then folded it along the sides to give it this three-dimensional look, where it's got this this chunkier bit here and a chunkier bit here with this slenderer part here. This is just one sheet of metal. They haven't bent it to give it more of a shape. It's just flat, goes up right here, tapers down, and then flares up at the end. So it's not the most flashy clip out there, but it is incredibly functional. It's very springy. You can get it pretty wide without hurting it or anything. And it also works really well with a bunch of different pockets. But it's definitely a different approach to a clip, very different approach than Lamy's. Okay, and both of these have triangular grip sections. Let's put that there. There. Okay, so I'll pick this one up here. All right, so the Lamy Safari has these cutouts here that are pretty deep, and it creates kind of this triangular wedge shape. And the idea is that it helps you to hold the pen with a proper grip. I would beg to differ a little bit. I think that it's too prescriptive, because lots of people use a triangular grip, but if you're like me, you kind of prefer your fingers to be rotated a little bit around. So this is another love it or hate it aspect of this pen. It looks nice, but it can be a little bit difficult for me to use sometimes, not the most comfortable. It's doable, but it's not the most pleasant grip section for me. I think that they do this because, well, one thing I forgot to mention earlier is that both of these designs have been around for quite a while, decades for the Lamy Safari, and I believe the Diplomat Magnum has also been around for quite a few years. I think it's more recently become available in the United States because of distribution things, but I'm pretty sure the design has been around for a very long time as well. And at least for the Lamy Safari, it's kind of a school pen. I used to teach English to kids in China over the internet, and a bunch of them had Lamy Safaris or knockoffs. This is a very common school pen, and I think part of that is, I think that's partly why it has this kind of grip, is to teach children how to hold a pen. But if you're an adult who already has some preferences there, it can be a little tricky. The Magnum has a much less pronounced cutaways there. They're flat rather than kind of going into the grip. So they're just kind of these facets, I guess. And there's one on the bottom as well. So there's 3 facets, and it works really well if you have a triangular grip, a standard grip. But again, sometimes I like to hold my finger more on top, my index finger. So sometimes I just kind of ignore the grip sections on these, the way they want me to hold the pen, and I just kind of hold it however I want. But I have much better luck doing that with this pen. I find this pen to be more comfortable for me than the Lamy Safari. That said, one complaint people have is that this is a very narrow grip section. It's not very wide, and these triangular bits make it feel even narrower to me. So it's almost like holding a pencil or just a regular ballpoint pen or something. It's very narrow, and it's a little bit too narrow for me, but I still enjoy using this pen, and I find it less distracting as I'm trying to hold it than this pen. This pen, as much as I like it, I just feel like every few seconds I'm having to like figure out how to hold it again, and it just is kind of distracting as I'm trying to write. This one doesn't seem to get in the way as much. Okay, we've kind of been getting into it a little bit already, but let's talk more about the differences and the pros and cons of these pens. So one main difference is the nib. It's a completely different approach to a nib, very different shape. Depending on the edition, these also come in just plain steel, but of course this one is black. So that's not really a difference because you have your choice of steel or black in, well, I guess it is kind of a difference because you can choose black or steel colored with this, and I think these are just all silver colored. But anyway, you can see how this has a more traditional flair to it with the nib. This has a more straight look to it. This also has a more traditional nib unit where you the nib is kind of stuck into the grip. I've never tried to remove it. I don't really have a reason to. It's probably removable. I'm not sure. But the Lamy Safari is definitely removable. The nib ends right here. That's it. And it has these little metal bits here. Sorry, it's really hard to see with this lighting, but has these little metal bits that kind of wrap around the feed and just kind of hug it and hold the nib on there pretty securely. So it's pretty easy just to pull these off, and you can buy replacement nibs in different sizes. So if you want to switch the size, or if you break your nib and you need a new one, you can just throw another one on there. So that aspect of the Lamy Safari I think is great. I wish there were more options in the entry-level world for replacing nibs. I wish I could go buy a TWSBI Eco nib or whatever. You know, you can't really do that. You just have to buy a new TWSBI pen and then swap the nibs or whatever. So I wish that was something that we saw more of. With this one, you're stuck with the nib that you get with it. There's no options to buy a new nib. One other difference, yeah, you can see that there. There's kind of a design there, some little etchings on there. Whereas with the Lamy Safari, it's much more of just a plain steel look to it. Not a bad look, but definitely more understated. And there are actually a few other big differences with these nibs. Lamy makes their nibs in-house. I believe that Diplomat uses Yovo nibs. So they buy their nibs from another manufacturer. This is a good nib. I like it. I had a little bit of trouble with it at first, and I had to tune it. I've got a video for that if you want to check that out. I'll put a card up here on the screen somewhere. But these nibs behave very differently. This nib, especially for an entry level, this nib is quite soft. It's a very soft nib compared to this, which is very stiff and firm. And so it's not necessarily that one is better than the other, it just might be a preference thing. I've become accustomed to stiff nibs because that's what most steel nibbed fountain pens act like, but it is kind of nice to try something that's a little softer, and it definitely changes the writing experience, I think, in some positive ways, to have this nib be just a little softer, have a little more give. You can even get a little bit of flex and line variation with this pen if you want to. After we run through everything about these pens, I'll do a writing sample, so we'll come back to the nibs at that point and talk about the actual writing experience with them. Okay, let's talk about converters here. So Lamy makes their own converters, and they are proprietary, so you have to use a Lamy converter. And they get the job done. They look nice, but this is their newer model. I have one of their older ones, and I like the older one a little bit better because it's a little bit smoother to use. This one feels a little bit stiff. And so especially if you're like cleaning out a pen and you're just twisting this thing like crazy, trying to get water in and out, trying to flush your pen out, this gets old. It's not the most user-friendly converter. It fills well. It fills pretty much all the way, which is awesome. So it's functional. It's nothing fancy, but it gets the job done. But you have to buy it separately, which is not unusual, especially with entry-level pens. But it's kind of a downer to spend extra money on a converter just so you can use your bottled ink in a convenient way. This pen, it depends on where you buy it, if it comes with a converter or not. I think the pen itself does not automatically come with a converter, but when I bought this from Goulet Pens, they were including the converter with the price. So instead of buying a $29 pen and having to buy a converter that's, I don't remember, $5, $6 or something on top of that, you buy a $23 pen and you're done. That's from Goulet Pens. I don't know if they're still doing that, but that's what they were doing at that time. This is a standard international converter. It's a fairly cheap one. It's a little bit like there's some rattliness in here. Not anything you can really hear when you're writing, but it definitely feels a little flimsy. But I don't think that this is a Diplomat made converter. I think it's just a generic thing that they sell as a promotion or whatever with certain pens. I have a nicer standard international converter that I wanted to put in this pen, but it didn't fit. And I'm still a newbie in some ways with pens, and if anybody can explain this to me, please go for it. But I have a number of pens that are standard international, and I have a number of converters that are standard international, but you can't necessarily just mix and match the converters. Sometimes they just do not fit other pens. So I don't know what the deal is there. So if you happen to buy this from a place where a converter is not included, you'll have to make sure that whatever converter you get is a good fit. So that's kind of not great, but if you can get it where it comes with the converter, then fantastic. Okay, I think we need to talk about size here, and I'm just going to hold these pens, not use the pen stand, because I love this angular shape, but I think it can give you kind of an optical illusion that one pen is bigger than the other when it's not the case. But here, the Lamy Safari is actually a bit bigger than the Diplomat Magnum. And it's not just length, it's also width. this is a pretty narrow pen. It's probably the narrowest pen I have. So it's definitely on the skinny side, where this is not necessarily chunky. It's maybe just more standard as far as the width goes. So you'll have to decide, do you want a slim pen that's a little bit shorter, or do you want one that's more of a standard size? One thing too, just occurred to me might be good to mention is how these pens post. So the Lamy Safari posts very well, very deeply. I like how it posts quite a bit. But because of this big metal clip, it is a little bit back weighted. It's not terrible, but I prefer writing with this one unposted because it's just a little too much back weight for me. And even though it goes in there fairly deep, it does become pretty long. I'll just set that there so we can do a size comparison with it posted. This one doesn't post as deeply, and there's some wiggle to it, but it's still pretty secure. It's not going anywhere. It's not as pleasant of a post, but as you can see here, it's not as long when it's posted. And because the clip is smaller and pretty slender, there's very little back weight to it. This is much more comfortable to write with posted. As far as the material for these pens goes, I don't sense a huge difference. I think that maybe the plastic of the Lamy Safari feels just a tad nicer than this does, but really it's a close call. Both pens are pretty durable feeling, and both pens have a fairly pleasant feel as you're holding them. So I don't see a huge difference there. Maybe this one wins out a little bit, but I don't know. I'm not really an expert in plastics. I think it's really just preference. Okay, let's do a writing sample. Both of these pens are fine, so you can get hopefully an idea of the line width with these pens, as well as we'll talk about just the experience of writing and how pleasant it is or how not pleasant it is. Okay, here we go. Okay, so this is a quote from Rumi, who is a Muslim poet from a very, very long time ago. And this is a few lines, and it says, "Just because you can't drink all that falls doesn't mean you give up taking sips of rainwater. If the nut of the mystery can't be held, at least let me touch the shell." And I love that. And I actually really love Rumi too. He's kind of a mystic poet, so he talks a lot about spiritually things and the universe and our connection to it. And I like this idea of all of this mystery that we're surrounded by, and we are surrounded by so many mysteries, scientific, spiritual, personal, whatever they may be. There are mysteries everywhere. They surround us, and we're never going to get all the answers, at least not right now in this life. But as a poet, I want to, like Rumi says, at least be able to touch the shell of the mystery. So as I'm writing, I'm always pursuing questions that I have, things about the world that amaze me and remind me that we live in a miraculous place. So if you keep your eyes open, you'll see some pretty amazing stuff. Okay, let's talk about this writing experience. First of all, I almost forgot to mention that I use the same ink in both of these pens so we can get a good comparison. And it is Lamy Benitoite. I really love that ink. It's a little bit on the dry side, can hard start in some pens, but it's a really pretty color. You can get some nice shading with it. It's really nice. So let's take a look at what I wrote here. As far as how it lays down ink, there isn't a huge difference. The Magnum does tend to write a little bit finer than the Lamy Safari. Again, both of these are fine nibs. They both have some feedback, kind of pencil-like feedback. Neither of them are scratchy. This part is the Lamy Safari, and this down here is with the Diplomat Magnum. So you can kind of see how there is some difference in line width, but not a ton. And I don't know if you can see this or not, but I think that the Lamy Safari writes just a little bit wetter as well as a little broader. The ink is a little more saturated and vibrant with the Lamy Safari. But as far as which has the better nib, I really think it's up to preference. They're both just different nibs, but as far as smoothness goes, they're pretty similar. So it really is just preference. So which one of these is better? It's a tough call to make. I can't really say for sure. But I think that they both just have their pros and cons, and you just have to decide what you're okay with as far as what those pros and cons are. So for me, I feel like the build quality, the aesthetic, the color options, the design, I just kind of like the Lamy Safari a little bit better than the Diplomat Magnum. But as far as just the writing experience goes, I would have to pick the Diplomat Magnum because it's just a more pleasant writing experience with the grip section and maybe even with that bouncy nib a little bit. I do really like this. And I mean, it's cheaper too, so it has that going for it. Comment below with what your favorite is and why you think it's the best. I'm very curious to know. And if you want to check out my versus video between the TWSBI Swipe and TWSBI Eco, I'll put a link to that below. And I think we're done for today, so I'll see you next time. Bye.